Good morning, podcast listeners, and welcome to Siemens for Startups podcast. I am your host today, Jim Gernatt, and I am really proud and honored to have two of my good friends with me, Ben Provan and Krista Covey from First Flight Venture Center in our very own North Carolina. First Flight Venture Center is an innovation hub. They have programming, they have mentoring, they have lab space. Their focus is on high science, high impact, and I am highly excited for them to be here with us today. So without further ado, we'll jump into it. Can you tell us a little bit about First Flight, a little bit about where you guys come from, and a little bit about what you offer to the ecosystem around Raleigh, North Carolina?
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Excited to be here. So First Flight, we've been around for over 33 years, since 1991. We are the oldest, dare I say, most mature business innovation hub in North Carolina, but we are best known for being a business incubator. So we have, as you said, offices, labs in the Research Triangle Park, which is so nice to have that available for early stage innovators and entrepreneurs who are trying to change the world for good. And as you said, we're focused on high science, deep tech, but ultimately high impact, right? So folks are solving big problems, moving the needle forward on the next generation innovation, and it's really exciting.
Awesome. And Ben, your role at First Flight has an interesting little twist to it, right? Ben, will you introduce yourself and tell us about Hangar 6?
I'm Ben Provan. I'm the director of Hangar 6, and we are essentially a prototyping studio inside of First Flight Venture Center. So as Krista mentioned, we are a community of deep tech, high science, high impact startups, which by and large means there is some hardware component to what they're doing. And we're also primarily very early stage startups that are making their first iteration or maybe second iteration of their product. So Hangar 6 exists to support the startups in that part of their journey. We were founded through a grant from the Economic Development Association called Build to Scale Grant, which essentially provided funds to get a bunch of very high-tech fabrication equipment and provide that to startups in various ways so they could get their hardware made. So in our current form, we serve startups in two primary ways. One is we give them access to equipment as well as software. These are very small, under-resourced startups, as many are. And so they, in many cases, can't afford to buy their own 3D printers or laser cutters or mills or lathes or their own full suite CAD and other software packages. So they can become members and then get access to this equipment, as well as some training and support on how to use it. And then the other way that we support them is through services, prototyping, design, and fabrication services. So I like to think of that as, a lot of these startups, they don't have a full engineering team. Some don't even have any engineering team. They're really scientists spinning out of perhaps Duke or UNC or NC State, or kind of having left a corporate job and wanting to take a technology to market. So they can bolt our team onto their team to get a piece of hardware made and don't necessarily have to hire that expertise in-house. And that's kind of the overview of what we do. And yeah, it's super fun to be able to work with these startups on quite a variety of different hardware projects.
That's really cool. When you go into First Flight, firstly, you're right in the middle of RTP, and you have big pharma nearby. You've got science all over the place. So you're right in the heart of RTP. Now, First Flight's been in that for a while. Can you talk about the journey of some of the companies that have progressed through this ecosystem and kind of where they are today to kind of give that longer term?
Yeah, so we like to say that we're in the heart of the Research Triangle Park. We've got all these wonderful amenities and this great ecosystem, but the journey for a startup founder can be really trying. Many times, as Ben said, they might be spinning out of a lab, they're working in a lab, come up with some discovery and want to take this to market. Or they may be a tinker, right? Working in their garage or in their basement or something like that. They come up with something and they think it can bring value, or they think it may turn into a business, but business is this completely foreign language. So what do? So that's what First Flight exists for, right? To help these innovators, help these wannabe entrepreneurs through that journey. Sometimes, we hear of these quick flash in the pan startups, they're making billions after a few years. Great, wonderful. But the reality is, it sounds wonderful, but that's not the reality, right? And so we need to make sure that we are providing that hand-holding from the earliest stages. So we have 14 different programs to walk them along their journey. An example would be like a propeller. So we help them take their idea, put together a business model, right? What do I think this idea could look like? How do I think it might make money to be sustainable? What is my market? Is there a market? So we help them answer a lot of those questions, and we do a lot of that early validation, customer discovery type of work. Then we help them put together a financial model. We'll help them develop a pitch deck, because you need that in many cases if you're going after investment, or if you're going after customers, or if you just want to pitch your idea to potential stakeholders. If you're trying to get funding even from your family, you want to make sure that your messaging is clear, right? In addition to those types of programs, and I could spend a lot of time on that, we provide mentors. So folks that have been there and done it, right? And they have big hearts and they want to give back. And again, they'll walk the entrepreneur through their highs and lows together, all the way through what we call our commercial success for these companies. And so we've had some big commercial successes. In fact, as I mentioned, we're best known for being a business incubator, even though we have all of these other programs. We serve about 30 to 40 resident companies in the incubator, getting access to offices, labs, and a community of support each year. And these companies that have graduated from just the incubator program alone, and there's over 400, about 420, 425, they create $20 billion in market capitalization annually. That's huge. That's significant. But they didn't start that way, right? And so our job is to help them get to that.
How do you kind of stay focused on that longer journey, and how do you keep your founders in that perpetual state of the possible, the art of the possible, the curiosity, not getting discouraged? My atoms aren't coming together the way I want them to come together. What would you say to that founder?
Yeah, so I'd say ultimately it's their why. So it's not just doing science for the sake of science. It's not just trying to build a company for the sake of building a company and making money. It's, I want to save lives. I want to positively impact my community. I want to solve a big challenge that is, affecting a big population, right? Ultimately, I want to make our world better, safer, healthier, right? So it's a really strong why. And that's why we say we focus on the high science, deep tech, ultimately high impact. So keeping that front and center, because business is hard. This is a long journey. And the tough thing is the funding piece of this too. As an example, we have a company that was an alumni. They're doing tethered drones, creating wind energy. Shout out to Windlift, CEO Rob Creighton. And so that's a 17-year journey. How do you stay motivated? You have to have a very strong why. How do you keep it alive? Well, you have to have funding. You have to have a team, right? Entrepreneurship is not a solo sport. You have to have a strong team, and you have to have people behind you. And so that's also where we come in, is we want to be a cheerleader and keep the momentum going.
Ben, not to put you on the spot here, but you have your own founder journey, which I think might be a nice piece of data for some of the founders out there. Would you care to kind of share about your journey?
I'm happy to share about that. I would not qualify it as a deep tech startup, more of a shared economy startup, but I think a lot of it's the same, especially when it comes to funding, staying motivated, team dynamics, all the things that if you're building an organization, you have to deal with. I did an MBA in 2011 and 2013, and through that process met a person who eventually became my co-founder by the name of Jay Stanish. And the beginning of my founder journey was meeting someone who I felt shared a very deep vision with and a conviction with around something. I think that having kind of a partner in crime, Krista, to your point around staying motivated and having the why front and center, it's a lot easier to do when you're not on your own. And I think for me, that's where my journey started in a lot of ways. And we both had a very strong conviction around the potential to create a housing product much more centered around community and sharing. And at the time, so I spent 14 years in the Bay Area. We were in the heart of startup country, startup land, if you will. Also, very, very expensive market to live in. So we had this idea of what if we created a better housing product that was more affordable, that was more grounded in principles of like sharing and connection and community, and sort of addressed what we saw as these two needs that maybe aren't intuitively connected. One of the expensive cost of housing in urban markets, and then the sort of what we deem the loneliness epidemic, but essentially, particularly young people, young professionals, feeling isolated and alone and not having the right spaces and opportunities to connect with peers. I will say contextually, it was at a moment where Airbnb, Uber, Lyft, WeWork. All those were just like incredibly exciting and new business models that were getting a lot of attention and a lot of funding. So with that backdrop, we decided to launch this company. We called Open Door Co-Living. And the idea was essentially you could sort of simplify it to like dorms for adults or shared housing for young professionals. We just leased a mansion in Berkeley and found a bunch of people to live in it and bought a bunch of furniture to put in the common areas and created a website and created a Slack channel. This is like early in the days of Slack, created like a resource board where people could share stuff in the community. And we're blown away by how many applications we got and how quickly we filled that house. And that was the kind of light bulb moment of this isn't just some idea in our heads, but potentially other people really resonate with it. So from there, we raised some money. We started doing more projects. There's a whole evolution in the business model. We started with leases. Then we became more of a property manager and partnered with developers. And then eventually we became a developer ourselves and began going after new construction projects. And as we scaled, so we ended up raising about 8 million in total. And we scaled to 3 markets, the Bay Area, Portland, Seattle. And we also scaled in the size of our buildings where we started, as I mentioned, with these mansions, but then we went more towards small scale apartment buildings, but then multifamily scale buildings, 5/1, where essentially, you have 5 stories of residential over a story of commercial. And it also started moving up real estate capital food chain, where we went from kind of mom and pop investors to more institutional investors. So there's a lot I can share about this journey, but what I will say is that it was an interesting experiment in a more kind of venture, high impact product mindset. Real estate is just a very, by nature, conservative industry designed to make safe investments, and venture is designed to, change the world and have 1 out of your 100 investments be the next Google, and 90 or 99 of them fail. And that became a real challenge at scale, where it was hard to get support from these larger capital institutions. And then the pandemic hit. We were making headway there, but those capital markets totally dried up. So we toughed out the pandemic, but ultimately couldn't raise the funds to keep the company going and shut it down at the end of 2022. So I've had the, whether it's fortunate or unfortunate, opportunity to see the full life cycle of a startup, not in a successful way. I mean, in many ways, there's silver linings and aspects of it that I consider huge successes. We were the first in that market. We really pioneered the space of co-living. And it's sort of an odd solace, but pretty much all of them have gone out of business, meaning the market itself collapsed in the pandemic. I got some thicker skin. I got some calluses, some scars from that. Who I am today is very much a function of that experience. But certainly would be happier if we'd gotten some big exit or some big IPO. But I think that if you're an entrepreneur, you have to be sober about the fact that success is an unlikely outcome and not the likely outcome.
How do you bring that idea of, okay, I'm not a failure, but the market wasn't right. The product, may or may not have been right, but there were these things that you could only control so much.
I think it just takes time to sort of digest and heal and reflect. And, it's not overnight, especially I was all in. And my co-founder, Jay, we were all in on this. I lived in one of our properties for 5 years. This was not some product I was making for other people. I believed in what we were doing. So it does take time. For any founder, I wouldn't expect if you shut down your startup, or even if you sell it and have a successful ending, but kind of move on. It takes time to reground and who you are now and what you care about and all that. I think in our case, it was helpful that the market itself was not successful, because it helped us feel like there's certainly things we could have done better and tweaks in 2020 hindsight, but there was maybe a more structural fundamental issue we were up against. There's a little bit of solace in that. But yeah, I think there's, for me, been a process of really harvesting what are the learnings that I've had and who have I become as a result of that. I mean, I feel so much more confident in myself and my ability to do business development and communicate really effectively and be in front of people who have lots of money or lots of influence, and hold my cool and stick to my vision, stick to my talking points, all that kind of stuff. There's just also all the basics of fundraising, learning how cap tables work, becoming sort of a layman's lawyer, where you can, learn a lot about how legal agreements work and what terms to look for. You look at enough employment agreements, partnership agreements, lease agreements, term sheets, you start to come up the curve in that. And I think you just do it and make some failures, with the caveat that I think incubators like First Flight can offer a lot of ways to maybe avoid some mistakes you would make if you're just totally doing it on your own. And that is a big part of the programming we offer. So.
But you're bringing this idea that it takes a community, right? There's a lot of minds you got to bring together. You got to take care of each other. Let me pivot just a little bit, that in mind. Krista, you came to First Flight a few years ago, right? But you're coming from Texas before this. Would you share just a bit about what you were doing and how you got here. Maybe just a brief overview of your journey, because I think it informs what a good innovation hub can have.
So my journey was a little bit different. I consider myself always been an entrepreneur even before I knew what that was. I was the little kid hustling with the lemonade stand, hiring my siblings, which I had three, to do work and sell hot dogs and lemonade on the street and all of that. So I've always been a hustler in one sense and trying to make things happen. I have had many, many businesses that I've started as a kid and throughout college. And then my undergrad was actually in marketing and business. And then I went right into finance. So I actually had a startup, correspondent lending. This was before the markets crashed and pretty much in 2008, 2009. So what I did is I would work with entrepreneurs who were trying to get commercial loans for buildings, for startup businesses, and help them get funded. And then I kind of saw the writing on the wall with the 2008, 2009. Thankfully, sold that business, so exited successfully. And then I went into banking. And so sometimes I found in life, it's great to know what you love to do, and it's also great to know what you are not meant to do or what you don't enjoy. I started working for a bank. They hired me and it was just overwhelming. I was working 100-hour work weeks. I was trying to keep the companies that I was working with out of special assets. I was working with this company in particular that was working in floor covering and trying to keep them out of special assets and keep them from having to lay off everyone in their company. It was a family-owned business. And I was like, gosh, this is just terrible. This is so hard. And I'm so limited in what I can do at a bank. And so I looked for other resources to help these folks stay in business. I started working with a local economic development organization, and I used them as a tool in my tool belt to help the companies that I was serving. And I was like, you know what? This is what I want to do. This is my cup of tea here. I feel good about, what I'm doing. I'm not just declining people for loans all the time. I get to actually help them stay in business and then ultimately grow and serve their community and serve their employees. So I took the big plunge. I started working for an economic development organization, cut my salary more than half. It was really painful at the time, but I've never looked back because I truly feel like I have found something that I love. I started working for the Pasco Economic Development Council in the Tampa Bay area in Florida. In economic development, typically there's three main functions. You're working with the big companies to recruit them to your area. Creates a lot of jobs, creates new capital if they're building buildings, buying equipment, right? So there's a lot of investment that happens. The second function is working with existing businesses and helping them to grow and be sustainable and continue to thrive. But then the third leg of that stool, which I argue is one of the most important pieces, is the bottom-up approach to economic development. It's growing your own. It's working with your local innovators, with your tinkers, with your problem solvers, and helping them get the right resources, education, and tools and capital to help bring their important ideas to market. And so even though I swore I'd never go into lending again, I started, a revolving loan program for early stage companies. I started getting people together, right? Because again, this is a team sport to serve entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurship is a team sport, but serving entrepreneurs is also a team sport. You can't do this alone. So I worked with universities, I worked with community colleges, I worked with libraries, I worked with chambers of commerce, the small business development centers, SCORE, Service Corps, anybody who was helping entrepreneurs in some way. I said, let's all get together, let's have lunch, and let's figure out how we can work together better. Ultimately, because we know entrepreneurship, it's important. That's how we bring wealth to our community. That's how we increase our skill sets. That's how we provide a future for our children. It's also the number one job creator in the US, right? Entrepreneurs and startups. So what can we do to make that happen? And so we also started the first incubator, and I'm now on my fifth, but I started 3 incubators in Florida, and it was really exciting. And I did that for about 7 years. And then I was invited to go to San Antonio, Texas, to kind of do the same thing. but from scratch. So started Innovation Center, an incubator. We had a seed fund. We had an international accelerator. And I worked for a foundation, the Texas Research Technology Foundation, who had been around for now over, well over 40 years. But what was funny is the foundation had a research park that was modeled after the Research Triangle Park. I'll say not as successful, right? But they knew the importance of incubation and acceleration and funding entrepreneurs as a means to economic development. And so this was focused on the life sciences, and it was, again, a lot of fun. So I did that for 3 years, built up the programs, got it to a sustainable model. And then I was invited to join First Flight Venture Center in 2020 at the height of the pandemic, which was another journey in and of itself. But it was, First Flight had a great reputation. There's not many incubators that have been around for over 30 years. I mean, North Carolina was very forward thinking to invest in incubation. Even though we're self-funded, they gave us the building. We have 25,000 square feet of space. I have 9 acres. And so it was an investment from the North Carolina Department of Commerce to say, this is important. They believed in that bottom-up approach to economic development. And to be able to see where it is today after 3 decades I'm excited in the morning to go to the office every day.
That is awesome. I mean, we've talked several times before this, but I didn't realize that there were multiple Florida incubators previous, and then Texas, and then here. So that's really cool. I can understand how you bring that into what North Carolina needs to do. I like how both your stories tie directly into how you're helping entrepreneurs grow to that next phase. Because I do think, and maybe we could talk about this, it's a new season for startups. I mean, if we had recorded this podcast 2 years ago, it would have a very different feel. Ben, let's go to you first on kind of the mechanical, the side of it, and talk to me about your vision of that.
I think deep tech has always been, to be frank, more challenging than kind of a SaaS or pure software startup to raise money for. As we talked about earlier, you just have much longer development timelines. It just takes longer to if you're creating hardware, to build it, to test it, and to fund it, because it's a lot more expensive to buy aluminum and steel and create PCB boards and all that kind of stuff than it is to put together a bunch of code. So I think deep tech has always had a challenge. The countervailing forces there right now, I think this huge investment in AI, while primarily software, it's opening up a lot of opportunity in the deep tech space, because the robotics realm and anywhere where you're in computer vision, those are both realms that really are becoming viable in a whole nother level that we haven't seen. I studied robotics. I specifically studied swarm robotics, which is this field where you have, instead of one expensive smart robot, you have a lot of smaller, less intelligent robots that collectively are intelligent, but also are much more resilient, because any one node in the system can get eliminated or fail, and the system as a whole accommodates. I worked on a Mars rover project, a self-driving car project, and then when I worked early in my career, I worked at Bose Corporation, the speaker company, working on everything except for speakers. Ironically, neural networks weren't really what they are now, and you just couldn't really create systems that were resilient and intelligent in the ways you needed to have them be autonomous. So that's one field I think is very exciting right now, where there is more money flowing into deep tech and applications across everything from sort of ag tech to certainly robotics, self-driving cars. Another realm, I think, clean tech and climate tech. It's not what it was a couple of years ago, and I think that as a whole, the amount of capital in the venture space has shrunk. But that is an area, sort of relatively speaking, to what it was 5-10 years ago. There's still a lot more capital flowing. There's some question marks certainly with what just happened in the political sphere, which we won't go into as to where that goes in terms of the public funds. But for the time being, there's a lot of also non-dilutive public money flowing into that. And that also helps these startups kind of get money to get out the gates, test their ideas, take some risks where maybe it'd be harder to raise pure private dilutive venture capital. Those are some of the hopeful silver linings and opportunities that I see in deep tech. But you're right. I mean, as a whole, it's awesome. That's sort of my lay of the land and how I see it. Certainly not comprehensive. I guess the one other thing I'll say is, I think life science and biotech in some ways is evergreen. And similarly, there's also quite a bit of opportunity there due to a lot in the AI realm of being able to unlock new molecules and new types of treatments and whatnot, where you're able to model proteins much more effectively and do a lot of stuff in the digital sphere. So I think that's another area that given where we are, we have a lot of biotech companies, obviously in the triangle and First Flight directly. So I that's where I would sort of place my bets if I had the opportunity to do so.
Yeah. Krista, a little bit different perspective. Why is it a good time to go deep tech, to either invest into deep tech right now, into these startups, or if you're a founder and you want to actually do something? I mean, why is now the right time to do it, even though it's hard?
Yeah, now's a great time to do it. And it's always going to be hard, I will say, but it's not without support. And when we're doing a lot more to educate our deep tech investors, frankly, and our community, what is deep tech? Why is it impactful? Why does it have meaning? What problems are we solving? Right. And so I think it's twofold. We need to have the innovators and entrepreneurs get excited about saying, wow, I think I've got a solution here. Now I can see the light at the end of the tunnel and maybe a clear path. But then we're also educating. We can also give investors, stakeholders, potential customers insight on this innovation that is happening. So I think it's twofold. And we're seeing that increase every day. So as a matter of fact, I was just at a USVI conference yesterday talking about drones and transportation and new forms of airlift systems. And I mean, just all this next generation technology. And each year that conference is growing, right? And so it's kind of exciting where you're seeing more summits happen. You're seeing people who care about deep tech. And again, deep tech can also be very broad, right? There's different industries within deep tech. But I think overall, there's a lot more excitement and there's a lot more confidence in having the resources and support from organizations like ours and many others and to move forward, right? And so again, I've said this multiple times, but we have to come together as an ecosystem to support this innovation. And so I'm so grateful for the partnership that Siemens and First Flight has because we're enabling more innovation to happen. We're, again, educating the community, but we're doing this in partnership and collaboration, which I think is so meaningful. And that resonates.
Sort of building off this, we did this deep tech workshop this summer, which was also sponsored by Siemens. So thank you for that. It was really a speaker series where we brought in leaders in the space in deep tech. For example, we had the CTO of Wolfspeed, which is one of the huge successes here in the Triangle. We had the CEO of Planted Materials, a really exciting carbon negative materials company. But what I was surprised with that was that we actually had roughly 50% investors participating. We did one investor panel where we had deep tech investors, two of them local, we had Oval Park Capital, and then a second F come, and then one from Silicon Valley, Swati Chaturvedi. I think there's definitely an interest and curiosity in the angel investing space. A lot of the angel investors in the Triangle, there's plenty of software investing, and then there's a lot of, a lot of these folks made their money in biotech, pharmaceuticals, kind of life sciences, which is deep tech. I mean, I would consider that under the umbrella of deep tech, but they're also beginning to broaden what they're interested in. And we're trying to bring some amount of education to the investor community on that front as part of kind of our ecosystem building efforts to obviously support startups in our incubator and hopefully just build out the ecosystem more broadly, because I think that's really important. And I like to think of regions have their own kind of identity and their own competitive advantage. And like we're very clearly advantaged in the biotech realm and life sciences. I would also say clean and climate tech is one where we have incredible stuff going on, and we have a lot of great innovation coming out of the three universities on that front. So I'm very sort of bullish on this region. Certainly I moved back here. I also grew up here. I'm sure I'm a little bit biased, but I think we have some unique ingredients and components. But one of the gaps is definitely in the investment sphere. I mean, so much of the capital is still in the West Coast and New York and Boston. So, but that's changing, and we're trying to facilitate that and educate more investors on that front.
There's a couple areas where we overlap, right? Where we complement each other. But at the end of the day, I think that you guys have a very unique offering. There are so many programs. There are so many things. One of the things that we're seeing as well, the investor community is coming around more so on deep tech now than it was 3 years ago. I think that AI, it's not just an acronym that you throw into a slide deck anymore. And if it is, you're going to get found out because there's a lot more education now. There's a lot more truth out there about what an AI is, isn't. However, for that investment community, I do think that the interest is there because there are some higher barriers to entry. Previously, and this is my own narrative, please comment on this. it was kind of the impression that like you didn't really want to invest in deep tech because these things are kind of hard to make. And if there need to be tweaks, that can be expensive. To your point, Ben, the resource hurdles are real. And then this convergence of technologies, there's a lot of derivatives that happen. I mean, there's just so many things you have to test and account for in that high science area. However, with a tool stack like Siemens, we have this thesis that we've been working off of, which is if you can bring more disciplines together sooner and iterate a lot faster with a high degree of fidelity on whatever hard tech or whatever hardware, whatever type of technology you're working, if you can iterate faster with a high degree of fidelity and be able to use what you're learning and incorporate it back for a better design faster, it doesn't mean you get to make tons and tons and tons of more designs. That's true, you do. However, it means you get to shorten how much cash you're putting into your product development, which means you get to focus the rest of your time, the rest of your money towards building out the market fit, building business validation with customer validation, getting traction. You get to spend your time doing the company side of it, and you can trust that your product is good enough for this milestone versus I hope it's good enough for this milestone. You can trust it. It gives you more confidence, right? So that's kind of my 2-minute working hypothesis. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Ben, coming from the mechanical engineering background.
For sure. Yeah. I sort of see a continuum starting in the digital sphere and then going into the rapid prototyping, where essentially the tools available are better and more affordable than ever to be able to increase the iteration cycle and get towards actually a manufacturable product sooner and at a lower cost. I think we've seen that for a long time in the software realm, and the ability to get an MVP out the door very quickly. By no means do I think hardware will ever match software in that speed. I think the deep tech space is still, there's just a lot of opportunity, and it's like more of an open market for like new innovations to come and create a ton of value. And as we talked about before, I think AI is just opening up use cases that weren't available or like way too costly, or you'd have to have way too big a processor and it'd be way too large power requirements. But the amount of stuff you can do on board, on a device, at the edge with lower power requirements is really changing things.
How do you help show that what is being presented in this pitch deck, that there's as much risk removed out of it from an investment as possible? How do you guys kind of go about that?
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, in the physical prototyping, I do want to get to your point around, we're very excited to add the Siemens software suite as part of our offering, and having startups begin to utilize those tools in the more digital sphere. But in sort of the hardware sphere, one of the ways is, I think there's a big difference between having something you hold in your hand and something you see on a screen. That's one of the things I'm always encouraging startups to do and working with them is, let's get the hardware version of a minimum viable product out there. It's not going to be perfect. You're going to have to leave features on the floor, but like, let's get something out there. I mean, we have a whole suite of 3D printers. It's very quick to go from a CAD model to a physical piece of hardware these days. We use a lot of Raspberry Pis and Arduinos to be able to get some basic amount of intelligence and sensing and sort of integration on the electronic side into a device. So I think that's the first thing I'll say with it. An investor, if you can hand them something that works, that's going to really show progress and viability. I do think in the digital sphere, there's an incredible amount of tools available now for simulation. Before you print something, you can have your entire model, in an assembly, and you can test the kinematics of it. You can test the structural and thermal sides of it. So a lot of that, depending on sort of the rigor and the challenging nature of the environment. So some products, like we're doing a bunch of medical devices, prototypes with startups right now. There, it's like the form factor is pretty large, and we're not trying to make some svelte final product, but just how do we cram all these sensors in here? We get to make a lot of mistakes in the CAD software, then we get to print it, make a couple more mistakes, and then finally get to something that works. But that's all in the matter of months. So yeah, I think getting hardware in investors' hands, but also potential customer or partner hands, that usually forwards the conversation much more quickly than a slide deck.
Krista, is there a company you'd want to call out that's a little bit further along that you can look as a bit of a model and just describe some of that briefly, but just tell some of the journey that they had?
I'll call out Nala Membranes, which is a company that joined First Flight around the time that I did, as a matter of fact. And so it was a mother-daughter team. They were polymer chemists and they were working on water filtration membranes. So think of water filters that go into large industrial reverse osmosis systems, right? For wastewater and also just for municipal water systems. That technology, these membranes have not changed in well over 40 years. And so the challenge is that with these membranes, they foul, right? So there's biofouling from the water that goes through them. So they have to shut down the whole system, take the membranes out, put them back in. And they can't use chlorine because the chlorinated water, which would help prevent the fouling, will disintegrate or eat away at the membrane. And so they created a chlorine tolerant membrane. So this is like the holy grail of membranes for water filtration systems. But it was just, again, it was a mother-daughter team. They needed an office. They wanted to test this idea. They needed a space. And so they started at First Flight with just an office, and then they added on a lab. We paired them up with mentors. We also worked with them as they were going after non-dilutive funding grants through SBIRs, Small Business Innovative Research dollars. So this is a great way to fund research and development and then get additional funding through SBIRs for prototyping through a phase 2. So SBIRs, just briefly, are from agencies like Department of Energy, Department of Defense, DoD, all the 3-letter acronyms, NSF, NIH, NASA, and many others. So any of these big federal agencies that have $100 million budgets or more have to allocate 3.2% of their funds to SBIRs and STTRs, which is the same thing, just tied to a university. So we encourage a lot of our high science, deep tech innovators to go after these grants, even though they're highly competitive, because they're non-dilutive. There's no equity out of your company. So it's essentially free money with deliverables. But they were able to get access through Department of Energy funding. They got other grants as well. And they started growing their company. They got early prototypes. They were able to utilize Hangar 6. They were also able to expand their physical space, hire more people, buy more equipment. And we have multiple programs, again, through companies, not only in the incubator, but also outside of the incubator. We serve about 700 companies across the state and internationally each year. So they took advantage of some of these other programs like the Captain Circle, which is mentoring and peer-to-peer learning. They also took advantage of some of the partner relationships that we had through loans and other programs with the Biotechnology Center. And so again, it's building up their model, building their team, as well as their actual prototype. And so that's why it's such a nice complement where we have Hangar 6 that can help you get the physical prototype, but then we surround them with all the business education and resources, right? So the CEO, Sue Meekum, was able to build out her C-suite, build out a sustainable business model. And then eventually she graduated from First Flight Venture Center a couple years ago now and has her own facility. Those are the companies that really excite me. We, as a team at First Flight get to celebrate in their win, right? They're doing all the hard work. But when Sue comes back and says, hey, I made this milestone. I got this opportunity to do business internationally. I got invited to speak at this event. We get to share in that journey with them. And so that's also part of the process too. It's the hardware, it's the prototyping, it's the design, it's all of that, and it's the business side.
That really is awesome. Ben, do you have one that comes to mind?
These are ones where they're coming out of the lab. I'm working on 2 different medical devices right now, and these are scientists at ECU that developed like a unique either process or technology. In one case, it's a computer vision process that can interpret things visually happening on the body or the surface of the skin. They're not engineers, right? They're scientists, but they need a prototype to be able to actually go raise money to apply for grants. So they hired us to create their first integrated hardware device. So yeah, these are early in the process. It's really fun from an engineering perspective to be able to create these devices and design them and be of service to these teams and be able to kind of help them see their vision come to life. And then we're very hopeful that this will help them get to that next level of funding, both non-dilutive and in both cases, they plan to raise some private capital. So That's probably, yeah, without breaking any NDAs, it's probably as much as I can say on those two. So,
Is there a question that you wish that more founders asked you?
Can I have help? So we have some wonderful, brilliant innovators and entrepreneurs in our ecosystem. And sometimes it's so overwhelming and so daunting that it's too big. And they're like, I don't know if I can ever do this, right? It's too big. It's too much. I don't know what I'm doing. And so I think there's a lot of missed opportunities. People just don't ask for help. And you don't know what you don't know unless you ask. So I'm just encouraging all of our listeners, if you've got an idea, if you think, maybe you don't have it fully baked, but you've got an opportunity to solve a big challenge, ask for help. Happy to ask First Flight if we can be of help, but go to your local incubators, accelerator programs. And if you've got a business idea, ask for help. There's great resources out there.
That's good. Very simple, but man, it does take a little bit of humility to just put yourself out there and be like, please, like help. Very simple, very, very direct. Ben, what's a question you wish people would ask you more?
I get a lot of very early stage startups and founders coming to Hangar 6, and they're very much focused on the technology and trying to get that out the door. But I think if more of them would ask questions around what's the market, who's the customer for this, like what's the size of the business I might create with this. Some people are asking that. I don't want to say like no one does that, but I think the more that technical founders start asking the business questions sooner, that's going to influence how you actually develop your technology. So you're solving real needs versus kind of sitting in your corner and working on the technology that's really fun and interesting to you, but maybe is not connected to solving real problems. I mean, it's hard when you're that early stage and you don't have a lot of resources, but I think the sooner you can get in front of customers and in front of investors, this is part of having gone through a full life cycle with a startup. I found, and particularly actually in the triangle, investors are more accessible than I thought they would be. And, it's like, if you want money, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask for money, something like that. Go in there and ask for advice and let them sort of provide you feedback. And then they have some ownership, having guided you a little bit. And then maybe they actually get interested in investing, but not as sort of an ulterior motive. But I think legitimately structuring your business, your technology around what would be fundable is important. Now, you don't want to bend over backwards so far that you compromise on your why and on your vision, but to be pragmatic about, like, if you're going to be successful, you have to balance the product development and technology with what's fundable and what customers will actually pay for. And so having those conversations sooner rather than later, I think might save you some heartache down the road.
Yeah, makes sense. Good perspective there. Krista, any final thoughts here?
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate the conversation. This is definitely a joy of First Flight. We are a mission-based organization, but we love to serve. We love working with our innovators and entrepreneurs that are out to change the world for good. And so we can't do that alone. We appreciate partners like Siemens and others that help us fulfill our mission. And so we're just grateful for the opportunity.
Definitely. It's an honor to be a part of it. Thank you. Perhaps the last question then is, how do people get in touch with you? How do we stay close to you guys?
So easy. Go to our website, ffvcnc.org. So First Flight Venture Center, North Carolina.org. Or you can call us. That's kind of old school nowadays. It's 919-990-8558. And happy to have a conversation, have a call. Love to help.
Well, thank you, Krista and Ben. You guys have been tremendous to work with. It's really been a privilege. Well, guys, thank you for listening to another episode of Siemens Startups Podcast. We know that startups and small businesses are the lifeblood of innovation, which is why we're proud to offer special packaging and pricing for startup companies. You can find that at First Flight Venture Center. We offered on nearly all areas of the Siemens software portfolio. If you're looking to take your startup to the next level, please reach out, learn more about the exclusive packages. Lastly, I would love to hear your feedback on the episode. I sure think Krista and Ben would appreciate it as well. Send me an email at james.gernatt@siemens.com, GERNATT@siemens.com, to share your thoughts and ideas for future episodes. Thank you for listening to the Siemens Startup Podcast, and we look forward to bringing you more exciting conversations like this with the most innovative startup companies around and the ecosystems that support them. I'm your host, Jim Gernatt. Remember, innovation has no boundaries.